how quickly was it you, Shawn, and Scott Hall traveling together?
The first night that I went to Vince's house, left Vince's house, drove to the Pepsi Center in Albany, and then we drove to, all the boys used to stay in this Holiday Inn. They called it the Jetport. It was across from the Newark Airport, and they gave us a $59 room rate, which in 93 was cheap for the New York area. And we would end up putting three of us in a room, because at that time for the WWF, you got paid $75 a day for TV, and you had to cover your food, your rental car, and your hotel. So it was, and Vince basically said that he didn't think we deserved to be paid because we were getting $1 million worth of free advertisement to get our characters over on his TV. All right.
But you pretty quickly, you're Shawn's bodyguard, then you're working with guys like Randy Savage, Kurt Hennig, and then we get into 1994. You have the big performance at Royal Rumble, win the IC title from Razor in April, and then at King of the Ring, they put you in, the main event with Brett, or build main event with Brett, champion versus champion, and you guys go like 23 minutes. So that was a long match for you at that point.
Right.
What was the kind of process of that being the match and it being a long match?
I think that was why. I never had a bad match with Brett, because A, he was so good, but B, he was so patient, and he was so professional, and he knew, like this. I don't care what kind of shape you're in. You can be on a stair climber at the highest level that it has for an hour, but there's just a absolute different conditioning when you get in the ring, and there's nothing that gets you ready for pro wrestling than wrestling, because you have to pick up a human being, and you have to pick that person up while you're moving, while he's moving, and it's kind of a dance, but it's not. It's kind of like it's a dance, but you're doing your own stunts, slamming each other and doing everything else, and at the same time you've got to go out there and tell a story. And Brett was incredibly gifted in all three of those aspects. So, what's that noise over there? The loudest cans of beer on earth. I thought the first time somebody was cocking a pistol. But no, I went out and had my match with Brett, and I was exhausted when it was over, but we got through it, and that was, it actually, I think shortly after that, Shawn and I won the tag titles in Indianapolis against the Head Shrinkers. So I was an IC champion, and then I was the tag champs with Shawn, and then later on in November they. All right, everybody, get your beers. Get your beers, because that's annoying.
I was going to ask you, but when you and Shawn won the tag titles from the Head Shrinkers, it was the night before SummerSlam at a live event they did it.
Yeah, it was in Indianapolis, in Market Square Arena. Yeah.
Was that like a last minute thing, and that's why they did it at a live event?
No, we knew we were going to go over. They just didn't tell the Head Shrinkers. So Shawn and I walk in the locker room. We sit down, and Alpha is their manager, and Sammy and Keish are looking at us and say, well, what do you guys want to do for a finish? And Shawn and I look at each other like, you don't know the finish? And I said, we're beating you guys tonight. And Alpha said, for the titles? Shawn said, yeah. Alpha, I smell a rat. I said, yeah, me too. And he's up there in Sanford right now. I said, his name's Vince. So Alpha goes out, makes a couple phone calls. And this is, back when you got to go find a pay telephone and do the whole thing. And he comes back in, and the guys, they were pros, and they did the favor for us. But as we the Market Square Arena was a gigantic arena, and they used to half it for wrestling. And we were walking through the curtain after our match, and I had the IC belt and had a tag belt, and then Shawn had it. And there's a bunch of the guys standing there, and we could hear them mumbling, and I heard one of them say, "How many belts do they need?" I went, "Oh, we're popular." But a month or two later, I had the heavyweight title. I said, "I guess all of them," So.
You and Shawn did the big split of Survivor Series '94 because the story was that Shawn kept super kicking you by mistake. How far in advance did you guys know Survivor Series is going to be the split, and were you guys happy at the time that was the way to go?
Once Vince decided he was going to go with me, I couldn't be his bodyguard, and we couldn't have I needed an opponent, so it only made sense that we would have friction. And we would end up wrestling like each other.
Was Shawn cool with the split, or was he?
I think Shawn brought me in with the idea or the intention that I would elevate him, and he'd get a world title shot. I don't think he realized his first world title shot would be against me. That he brought in, but it's kind of the luck of the Irish. You're 6'10", you're just, sorry.
And then 3 days after Survivor Series, you beat Bob Backlund to win the WWF title at Madison Square Garden.
Right.
How much notice do you have that you're winning it, and what do you remember about that day?
We went on a European tour, and they weren't doing anything with me because I'd lost the IC belt back to Scott at SummerSlam with Walter Payton was in Scott's corner. And then we did the split at Survivor Series with, so the tag belts were gone. So when I went on this European tour, Shawn and I weren't working together, and I was just kind of working. I was just on the card to be on the card. And I was wrestling with Rikishi, against Rikishi every night. And, when you're on the road like 320 days a year and you have like matches that don't mean anything, and like with the people, and when we used to come to Europe, the people were always so good. They would, it was such an easier crowd. The people were so much more receptive than a place like Philadelphia, where unless you cut your leg off, they weren't going to even make a sound. And so as the tour went on, it got, like a little bit of a hot spell came through. The buses weren't equipped, and the buses were really, really hot. And this is kind of before that whole bottled water craze. So we had beverages on the bus. It's just that the beverages were beer for after the matches. So a couple of us that weren't, kind of featured in the show decided that we would play cards and drink beer. And we drank a lot of beer. So by the time we got to the building, we were visibly impaired. But we're pro wrestlers, so we can work around it. So one of the agents, Tony Gurria, walked by me and he said, Nash, you smell like a brewery. I was like, ugh. So at the end of the day, before we get on the bus, George the Animal Steel tells me, they used to call Vince Caesar. They said, Caesar wants you to call him. There's a phone that you can use in the production office. So I'm calling from, God, where were we at? I think we were in Austria. And I'm calling Vince, and I'm like, oh, hello, Vince. He goes, Big D. He goes, when you get in, Marco's going to bring you straight to my house. I need to talk to you. Kind of short, you know. And I'm like, okay. Is it everything all right? He goes, yeah, it will be. And then he hung up the phone. So I'm like, oh. Like, well, he's so pissed off at me right now. He's not gonna fire me on the phone. He's gonna wait till I go fly back, drive out to his house, and he's gonna fire me in person. So I've been on the road now for with the TVs, the bit that we did in the States, and then I think we did 3 weeks over. I've probably been on the road for 35 or 40 days. So, and I'd never been able to sleep on a plane, especially back then when nobody flew first. So you know, from flying, I remember flying to India and sitting next to Undertaker and Coach. I was just like, oh God. But so no sleep. I get to Vince's house, and his house is warm, and I'm waiting for him, and his maid brings me in and like brings me into the fancy living room, not like the living room you watch TV in. The one, and on the wall is probably an 8-foot by 4.5-foot painting of Vince. I mean, I'm like, I swear to God, I thought it was a National Lampoon movie. I was just like, he's got a red, he's like. So I'm sitting in his house, and I said, oh God, sitting on his couch, and he's like a half hour late already. I'm looking around, I said, oh God. So I took my shoes off. I said, and I kind of like, so instead of like, this is the end of the couch. So I just kind of like take my shoes off, but I kind of have this leg kind of up on the couch, and I'm in the corner, and I'm like, I'm not going to fall asleep. I can go ahead and put my other foot up. So I put my other foot up on the couch, and then I fall asleep. And once you fall asleep, then what do? You immediately, it's your bed. I mean, I'm on my side, I'm snoring. Vince comes in, he goes, make yourself at home. I'm thinking, oh my God. He goes, come on out by the pool. So I'm like, and I've had no sleep, I'm exhausted, I'm figuring I'm getting fired. And he's got this really kind of weird look in his eyes. And we're sitting there, and he doesn't say anything for a minute. We're out by the pool, and the back of Vince's house, I don't know where, I've been, this is his house at that time, was on the polo grounds in Sanford, Connecticut. And the actual polo field was in his backyard, but it had probably I don't know, maybe a 15 to 20 foot like stone wall that like went down to the grounds. So you were elevated. I was looking out on the grounds, and Vince was looking back at his house when he was talking to me. And I've never been out here, so he's talking to me, and I'm kind of like looking at each other. So I figured I'm getting fired anyway. I might as well have something to tell story-wise. He goes, and then we'll go to the garden, we'll put the belt on you. I said, so I'm going to be the Intercontinental Champion again? He goes, no. You'll beat Backlund in 8 seconds, and you'll be the world champion. And I'm like waiting for the laughter, and there's no laughter. I said, so I'm going to be the world champion at the end of November? And he's like, yeah. So I said, okay. So I called my wife, and I told my wife to get a plane ticket and to fly to Detroit, because my mom was, I mean, she was really, my mom died of cancer. I won the championship in November 24th, and my mom passed December 27th. So, I mean, I knew this was a chance for me to get home. I was coming off the road and to see my mom. And I told her that, you know, the news. She was like, good for you. Yeah, that's great. And, so lo and behold, I became the world champion. And I'm probably one of the most orientated, like driven human beings. So I set goals in my life. Then, like, once I accomplish them, I have to find something else to do. So my goal was to one day be the world champion. But that was like 15 years from when it was going to happen. So once I won the world championship, and every guy that becomes a world champion for the first time, especially in this era, in '94, when there might be one title change a year, sometimes none. Sometimes people would have the belt for 2 years. I mean, Hogan, I think, had it for 4 at one point. So, like, you win it in Madison Square Garden, they make sure that you win it in 8 seconds, which is the record. And they flew me in like a day early, and they did a thing where I walked the streets of New York, and they filmed me with the people talking to me and stuff. And so I was staying at the Sheraton, I think it's on 56th and 4th. And I got back to my room and unzipped my bag, and there was the WWE title, WWF at the time title. I was just like, oh my God, like this is real. And then I just looked at it, I held it up, and I put it around my waist, and I looked in the mirror in the room, and I went, now what? Like, now what do I do? And I was kind of a conundrum. Until I left and started with Scott, I didn't know what to do. I think the NWO probably, was like a godsend for that alone, because at least I was going to another company where I could shoot to become the world champion. So
Once you win the belt in November, and then by January you're facing Brett at the Rumble for the title. Shawn's winning the Rumble. You guys are best friends and going to be wrestling at WrestleMania. How tough was it to be so close, but it must be a competitive edge at that point when you're going to be having a match?
nah, because we're still traveling together. Like, we're all like the Kliq's traveling together, so we really were kind of a one for one, all for one and one for all kind of a situation. So we knew, as long as somebody in our group had that, we all had titles.
When Shawn had his incident in Syracuse, you're in Europe when it happens. How do you find out about it, and what's kind of your reaction? Because obviously you'd have been there.
One of the agents, when I got to the building the next night, 5 o'clock, and they said, Shawn was in the hospital. He got jumped last night. And I'm like, who was with him? He's like, Davey Boy and Shawn Waltman. I said, they didn't do anything? He said, they weren't and so it was explained to me what happened where um, Shawn was basically had fallen asleep in the car, and they put him. They fell asleep in the bar. They carried him out, put him in the front seat of the car. They walked back in to go drink some more, and they didn't lock him in the car. So a bunch of Marines who their girlfriends were oogling over Shawn. Um, and I used to tell people all the time that the girls would hit on Shawn, and their boyfriends would want to fight. And I'd walk over to him because I knew I was going to have to always be the heater. And I'd walk over to the dude, and I'm like, dude, give him 15 minutes. He'll be so drunk. The last thing he'll want to do is talk to your girlfriend. Go away. Lo and behold, half hour later. So I think that was my job for the first 2 years I was in the WWE was putting Scott and Shawn on a luggage cart. So we used to pull the van up in front of the hotel, and I drove. I drove every mile because I always said to myself, like early in my career, I traveled with Rick Rude, and we were there's a part in Indiana, and it's like in the middle of the state of Indiana. Half of it has daylight saving time, and the other doesn't. And you wouldn't know that unless you, of course, was a farmer that lived in Indiana. So Rude and I are driving to a show, and we drive into we left Indianapolis, and we're driving to towards Louisville. So we're driving west, and when we got into the town, it was a small town. I think it might have been Evansville. It was one of those deals where, and it's funny how you don't see this anymore, I guess because everybody has a smartphone. But remember back in the day, there was always like a bank in like major towns that would have a digital time on it. So as you drove into the town, you'd look, be like, oh, it's 5:05. And then it would flash and give you the temperature. So lo and behold, this thing, goes off. Well, nobody has a phone. Nobody's wearing a watch. So it's just like, and I was driving, and I started speeding up, and Rude put his hand on the wheel. He looked at me, he says, rule number 1, arrive alive. And I said, yeah, but he said, we're going to be late. He said, if we're 5 minutes late, they're going to scream at us. If we're a half hour late, they're going to fine us. If we're an hour and 15 minutes late, they're just going to be happy to see us that we're not dead. And I went, we pulled up an hour and 15 minutes late. God, we're glad nothing happened to you. Because this is before cell phones. So, nobody missed towns. Nobody was late to the building. So if something happened, it was usually catastrophic. It usually was involved to death. And I just kind of looked at Rude like, so when I joined the WWE, I just remembered, like, I just figured I was the most responsible, so I would drive, and I was always the driver. And so we got Hunter. Hunter had his tryout, and we're all at the monitor. He was really good, and we're like, wow, he's good, man. Like we can use him. We'll throw him in the Kliq. So we kind of started recruiting him, and it was like Worcester TV was the first time that we saw Triple H. And I mean, he's got slacks on. He's got a sports coat. We're like, oh boy. And he came, Killer Kowalski had trained him. So we were like, hey man, like, why don't you jump in with us? He goes, I came with Walter, you know, he broke me in. I don't want to leave him, which was admirable. And we were like, okay. I said, next TV, I said, don't hook up with Walter. I said, I said, the loop starts in Cincinnati. I said, I'll be there to pick you up. So he said, okay. I said, I get everybody's flights from Jamie. So I said, I'll know what time you're coming in and everything else, and I'll meet you at the Cincinnati airport. So we get in the van and we drive around for about 2 or 3 days, and I'm realizing he doesn't drink. So I'm just thinking maybe he's just not comfortable drinking around us. I said, so I'm driving. It's maybe 12, 1 o'clock in the morning. We're on our way to the next town. And everybody else is had their beers and is out cold. And it was nice at this point to have actually somebody to talk to. So I said to him, I said, so you don't drink? He goes, nah. I said, like, never? He goes, I've never had a drink in my life. I went, you've never had a drink in your life? Turn signal? Side of the road? Got out, walked around the back. He doesn't know what I'm doing. I opened up his car door. I said, see that seat over there with the wheel? I said, that's yours. I said, I've been on the 50-mile no alcohol rule for the last 3 years. I've been driving these knuckleheads around. I said, so now I get to have my cocktails. I said, I promise you I'll be a good, you know, I'll be a great co-pilot. I won't fall asleep on you. I won't get hammered, but I'll at least have a couple of beers. But there were times where, before he came, that Shawn and Scott would get wasted. And we're talking like, so the rule was that you drove anything town to town, and the cutoff was 300 miles. So this would be a loop. Toronto to Detroit, it's like 279. Detroit to Chicago, 287. Chicago to St. Louis, 299. Because you'd set the triptych, and when you left that building, when you hit the city limit sign, if it was outside at 3, then you could piss and moan. And it never was, but I mean, it would be it was 280 every night. And 280 is a lot of miles every night. And I'd pull up, and this is before cell phones, before the internet. So you basically pull into Chicago, and once you look for those signs, what you're looking for is, back in the day, they had these things called red roof inns, and they were motels. And you could back the van up to the motel and the hotel room, and then just take the bags in, and I could drag their dead bodies in. But if not, you'd have to stay at like a Ramada or something like that, and they had a lobby with the elevator, because nobody would want to. You could still get it, but you'd end up on the second floor, and I'd have to take the baggage cart, go out and take these two guys in and explain to them they're both diabetic, and they haven't had anything to eat, but they'll be fine. And that was
for my
why I got gray hair.